Možete zatvorimo vrat. Eto. Dobro večer svima. Dobrodošli. Uvažena pomoćnice ministarke u Odseku za kulturno nasleđe i digitalizaciju Danijela Vanušić, koju očekujemo svakog trena da stigne. Menadžeru asocijacije srpskih arhitektonskih praksi Igor Marsenić. Članice i članovi saveta Milka Gnjato, Danilo Dangubić, Predrag Milutinović, Relja Petrović, kustos Muzeja primenjene umetnosti, a i sama se pridružujem ovom pominjanju. Članice i članovi žirija, profesor dr. Vernera Sobek, predsednik žirija, posebno poštovanje, Aleksandar Zeljić, koji dolazi iz Čikaga i iz Gensler studija, Marijana Radović iz M2 ateljeja u Milanu, dr. Dubravka Đukanović, direktorka Republičkog zavoda za zaštitu spomenika kulture, dr. Ljiljana Blagojević i prošlogodišnje dobitnice Grand Prix nagrade, dr. Marija Maruna i Ljubica Arsić. Drage koleginice, kolege, prijatelji i ostali uvaženi gosti. Iskreno je zadovoljstvo da vas pozdravim ispred Muzeja primenjene umetnosti, institucije koja realizuje Salon arhitekture već 45. put, pa samim tim sada imamo i mali jubilej. Ovaj, da tako kažem, praktično mesec arhitekture, institucija Muzeja primenjene umetnosti realizuje u direktnoj i bliskoj saradnji sa Asocijacijom srpskih arhitektonskih praksi, koja okuplja blizu 50 studija i odvija se pod sloganom Salon dijaloga. Koncept je proistekao iz potrebe za dijaloškim pristupima u zajedničkom cilju, u oblikovanju okruženja u kome živimo i koji živimo. U toj ideji vodilji da razgovaramo o važnim temama i pitanjima, realizovali smo, pored svečanog otvaranja revijalne izložbene postavke, koja se može pogledati do 29. aprila u Muzeju primenjene umetnosti, i predavanja svih članica i svih članova žirija. Od predavanja o arhitekturi razgovorom dr. Ljiljane Blagojević, zatim kritičkog mišljenja kao doprinosa dijalogu o arhitekturi dr. Marijane Marune, preko neraskidive veze enterijera i eksterijera Marijane Radović, i teme premošćavanja jaza između obrazovanja i prakse Ljubice Arsić i Danijela Fluksa. Usledile su teme o kreiranju budućnosti gradova Aleksandra Zeljića i o kontekstu, odnosno o zaštiti graditeljskog nasleđa dr. Dubravke Đukanović. Večeras, kao jednu krunu ovih važnih tematskih različitosti, imamo čast da saslušamo, odnosno slušamo, profesora doktora Vernera Sobeka o budućnosti graditeljstva u Evropi i svetu. Integralni deo programa 45. Salona arhitekture predstavljali su paneli od teme o zelenim tehnologijama Lare Kačer, preko najnovijeg razvoja fasadnog inženjeringa i dizajna usmerenog ka čoveku Benjamina Bira, zatim predstavljanja projekta Belgrade Expo Marka Stojčića, glavnog urbaniste grada Beograda, do stvaranja virtualnih prostora sa različitim učesnicima. Sve navedene teme dokumentovali smo i nastavit će da žive na YouTube kanalima Muzeja primenjene umetnosti i ASAP organizacije, čime zajednički ističemo potrebu za kontinuitetom, koji predstavlja drugu konceptualnu potku. Inače, ovih dana često se susrećem sa pitanjima novinara i ostalih koji su zainteresovani da pričaju o Salonu arhitekture, pa me pitaju šta je to što smatram da je stalo u Salon arhitekture. Ja čisto onako lično volim da kažem da je u Salon arhitekture stalo vreme, ali isto tako da isto to vreme nije stalo. Dakle, 45. Salon arhitekture je salon dijaloga, kontinuiteta, okupljanja i razmene u težnji ka poverenju i sveobuhvatnosti. Iz potrebe za ovim sveobuhvatnim posmatranjima i dokumentovanjem različitih iskustava i praksi u arhitektonskom oblikovanju, u teoriji, u kritici i tako dalje, razvija se i potreba za međugeneracijskim dijalogom. Iz navedenog usledio je do sada najbrojniji odziv publike i javnosti koja prati dešavanja i u fizičkom i u virtualnom prostoru. 45. Salon arhitekture sa sadržajnim, konceptualnim i programskim rešenjem realizovali smo zahvaljujući Ministarstvu kulture Republike Srbije, ali i sponzorima Alumil, Ako, Saint-Gobain, Mega Koncept, JAF i ovim putem im svesrdno zahvaljujem. Posebno se zahvaljujem na saradnji sa Jugoslovenskom kinotekom, gde smo trenutno, u čijem smo prostoru, imamo ovu svečanost. Zatim hvala timu Muzeja primenjene umetnosti, dizajnerki Dejani Cvetković, fotografkinji Dragani Udovičić i PR-u Ivoni Ivković. Pre drugog dela večerašnje večeri koju ću ja da vodim, gde ćemo da dodelimo nagrade, priznanja, pohvale i priznanja, večeras bi sada u ovom trenu predala reč Igoru Marseniću koji će da nastavi dalje tok.
Poštovana gospođo Jotić, uvaženi članovi Saveta 45. Salona, uvaženi članovi Žirija, cijenjene kolege, za Asocijaciju srpskih arhitektonskih praksi bila je izuzetna čast i privilegija da ove godine učestvuje u realizaciji 45. Salona arhitekture Salona dijaloga. Mi zaista verujemo da je izuzetno važno da se arhitektonski život vrati u institucije koje je ovo društvo stvorilo. On ne može da živi van njih. Zauzvrat, Muzej primenjene umetnosti je kao retko koja nacionalna kulturna institucija otvorila vrata za sve nas. I svi mi različiti iz ovog ipak jedinstvenog polja arhitekture smo imali priliku u ovih mesec dana i kroz ove brojne panele, predavanja o kojima je gospođa Jotić govorila vama, imali smo mogućnost da se susretnemo i da razgovaramo o brojnim izazovima s kojima smo suočeni, bez obzira da li se radi o edukaciji, teoriji, kritici, stvaralaštvu ili arhitektonskom preduzetništvu. I zaista verujemo i mislim da delim uverenje svih svojih kolega iz Asocijacije srpskih arhitektonskih praksi da je najveća vrednost, najveće postignuće ovoga salona činjenica da se mi međusobno, nekada udaljeni, ipak sada malo bolje poznajemo i da smo pokazali svim onim ostalima u javnom životu da smo zreli i da arhitektura zaslužuje svoju kuću arhitekture. Zahvaljujem vam se što ste saslušali ove reči koje sam ja ispred Asocijacije srpskih arhitektonskih praksi trebao da vam uputim, da podelim sa vama. Ne bih uzimao vreme gospodinu Verneru Sobeku, kojem zaista sa zadovoljstvom prepuštam binu i reč i da nam se obrati večeras. Izvolite, gospodine Sobek.
Thank you so much for introducing me. Unfortunately, I do not speak your language. I apologize. So the only thing I understood was the direct one-to-one translation. Thank you so much for helping me out. I learned that everyone here in the auditorium knows everyone. I unfortunately do not know anyone. So, but maybe the evening gives me a chance to have a talk to the one or the other of you and to learn a little bit more about the situation of architecture and art and structural engineering and the entity of all of this in your country. I thank you very much for inviting me to be the president of the 45th jury or Salon of the Salon. I think this was a very remarkable jury session because the entries indicated a certain turn in how to interpret the obligation and the responsibility of the architecture of tomorrow. And this is a little bit what I'm going to talk about this evening in my lecture. I hope it is of somehow interest for you, because sometimes it will cause contradiction. I will mark contrasts maybe, but this brings a little bit life into the discussion. The situation nowadays is very much determined by the fact that we have a lot of people, we do not really know what the situation about is. We talk about 6.6 billion people, which we group into something which is the third world. In very former times, there was a first, a second, and a third world. Then it turned out that this does not make any sense. Then we forgot about the second world and grouped most of the countries of the second world to the third one. And since the United Nations found out that this does even make not any sense, they introduced a much more complicated categorization nobody really knows and nobody really understands. So I'm using those very arrogant terms, first and second world, because they stand for an interpretation of the West relative to the rest. And the West, who is responsible for the mess we are in, means the global warming, the waste of the oceans, the production of material which are hypertoxic, etc., talks about relatively arrogant about the rest as a third world, means a third ranked. If you look a little bit more close, we should say that the third world should stand on the podest, on the podium, on the uppermost position, because they behave in a way that it is not in contract to what nature needs. But before I focus a little bit on these very critical issues, and at the very end show the work of ours, I show only my own projects, because these are the own projects I'm competent to talk about. I never talk about the projects of other people or criticize them. This is their stuff. I want to draw a little bit the actual situation, which is determined by the fact that we have global warming and waste, and that we are running out of resources, and that in Germany the building prices are exploding, and that people tell you that in Africa the population will double within 1 generation, meaning that we need 1.2 billion homes in addition to the homes which do not really exist. There are already 1.2 billion of people living there. And so we have a multiplicity of different aspects we are talking about. You can group them in different scientific disciplines, and you find out that the disciplines do not talk to each other and that there's no common understanding. If you would ask someone down out there in the street, what is the global warming actually, what is the number? He would say 1.3 degrees, and he is right. You ask the next one, he says 1.2, and he's also right. And you ask the next one, he has 1.05, and he's also right. Because what nobody knows is that we have 3 different definitions of global warming. The one is by the IPCC, the other one is by the NASA in the United States, and the third one is by the German Meteorological Society. So if you do not add the very specific, what is the base period to the number, just publish the number, you might publish anything and everyone will understand anything. And this is a little bit a description of where we are in. Some disciplines, they do their publications in British coal tons, the other one's in exajoule, and the third one's in kilowatt hours, and then it's yours to sit down there in the Saturday afternoon and count the energy consumption of the buildings you are actually designing, and then you have to convert British coal tons into exajoule, and get an imagination what is an exajoule or a kilojoule or whatever we are talking about. So it is a little bit about like building the Tower of Babylon after Yahweh, the God. He was not called God. His name was not allowed to be spoken out, came down. And what was before? There was the rumor going on that in Babel, the people said we are going to build a tower so high never seen before, and the tower is going to reach the door to God's house. And they did so. And the god at those times got wind of it. And of course, this was an aggressive act. He could never allow the human beings to build a tower that high. So what did he do? Instead of throwing an atomic bomb, a nuclear bomb or whatever, the Bible says, the Old Testament, and he flew down and he looked at the people and they spoke one language. And this enabled them to build this unbelievable building, because it allowed them to do all the logistics and the buildings and the organization of the structural engineering, the architecture, and what was ever needed. It was one language. And he took them their language, and from this day on, they were incapable to continue building the tower. And we, in our situation, we have an inverse Babylonian problem. We speak many, many, many languages, and we would need one. The one which unifies our thinking in order to comprehend and understand what is really going on as a basis for action, for a conscious, scientifically based action, which is absolutely needed. So we need that language, and we don't have it. And the scientists are proud. A friend of mine who is working in the Department of Physics, he said, I don't understand even my colleagues because I'm doing astronomics and he is doing microphysics, and the only thing we can talk about in one faculty is football, soccer. We are too specialized, and they are proud on their specialization, sitting in a very deep hole and doing world-class research, but being incapable to talk to someone who is doing research in the forestry or in oceanography or in architecture or in urban design or in mobility or in material production, etc. But the building industry unifies all those things. The built environment, that's what we are responsible for, stands for about 50 to 60% of the resource consumption, 50% of the waste production, more than 1/3 of the energy consumption, and about 50 to 55%, this will be a surprising number for you, of the greenhouse gas emissions. So it is the building industry, and it is us being one group of the leaders in the so-called building industry, which is responsible, which is most responsible for global warming and messing up the planet with waste. The biggest lever arm to solve these problems is in our hands. And to give you an insight in how we think, how I think, and how we try to solve the problems, to understand them, to bring all those disciplines together in order to get some methods and some tools which might solve the situation we are in, I give you a short guidance through my thinking, so I apologize, it's very private thinking. See, let's look at population growth. I unfortunately don't have a screen here, so I permanently have to turn around or remember the slide number 55 in back of mine. The population growth is the red line in the diagram over there, and the increase of population given in percent is the blue line. And we realize that the population increase is continuously sinking in this world, continuously. Means that the increase in the population is going to slow down. We will never reach the number of 12 billion people, as some of the researchers indicate. Never, never, never. If the decrease of the fertility rate, if the decrease, for example, of the growth factor somehow continues. We have to face the fact that, for example, in India, which is now the biggest population in the world, in the year 1952, the fertility rate was 5.2, means 5.2 kids per woman. Nowadays, it is 2.1. If you have a homogeneous population body, as the researchers say, means an even distributed age situation, then 2.1 means stagnation. So if we look at India, this is a tremendous success of family politic to come down from 5.2 to to 2.1 within 70 years. Tremendous success. Nobody talks about. But the population body is not healthy, as the researchers, as the scientists say. There is plenty of young people. Half of these 1.4 billion people is younger than 25. And if every woman being younger than 25 gets 2.1 kids, then the population is going to increase in one generation by 500 million people. Or if you count that into concrete needed to build houses for the increase, it's 300,000 million tons of concrete. 300,000 million tons of concrete. I very often translate those numbers into another discipline in order to give you a feeling on what we are talking about. So we have to expect a decrease in the increase of the growth of the population, and probably it will drop, it will stop about 10 billions at the middle of the century, means in 2050. My prognosis is typically end at 2050, as here in this diagram, which we did for the last book I published. I do not include in those numbers and developments the people dying because of hunger and the lack of drinking water. We are touching this issue later. Now, another issue is, where will the growth take place? If we take the planet, it is very interesting to see that you might draw two lines, 30 degrees north of the equator and 30 degrees south of the equator. I call that the 30-30 degree line. This is where the population growth is going to take place. There is no population growth in Italy, not in Russia, and in many other countries. There is a decrease in population in China because of the one-child politics, which is now hitting the social situation. The United States still have a moderate growth, but they are growing bigger and bigger. But the action will take place within the 30 to 30 degree band. Keep that in mind. Now we talk about actually the population. Where do we have the highest density? Of course, this is very well known. It is India, it is China, it is part of South America. In absolute numbers, not in relative numbers per square meter. Therefore, Russia does not play any role, for example. And now we realize the majority of the human beings lives in a band around between 20 and 40 degrees north. This is interesting. There's a very small stripe between 20 and 40 degrees. From 10 degree to 10 degree, it is just 1,100 kilometers. So the stripe or the band I just drew up between the red lines, this is a distance of 2,200 kilometers, which you can even do with a bicycle. Means remember migration options. Migrating 2,000 kilometers is not really an issue. So we learned that in the band of the highest density of the population, which is from 20 to 40 degrees, other actions are going to take place, and this is climate change in a very dramatic way. What is climate change? Okay, we all know the number 1.3 degrees, and nobody knows why 1.3 or not the NASA declaration, etc. Let's take the IPCC number 1.3. What is this? This is the average temperature over 1 year over every point on the planet. So it's the average of the average of the average. It is just a number which tells you nothing at first. But at second, it's very interesting to take the number apart and to look a little bit what does it really mean and how is the number composed of. So this is the 1.3 degrees, but remarkably, over the oceans, the average over all the water surfaces over all the year is only 0.6. And the rest over the terrestrial areas is 2.0. Over all of them, over all the year, the average of the average, but it's already 2.0, which is very important. Regional and seasonal, it's 20 degrees and more. We know that since 1977, since Someone working in ExxonMobil, a researcher called James F. Black, found that out. His report was such a catastrophe that the leaders, the CEOs, and the board of ExxonMobil, the largest producer of oil, said, from now on, this is a secret. The report has been put into the safe, and it came out a few years ago in the context with a big lawsuit in the United States. So the responsible people knew about the global warming, the impact, and what James F. Black found out, that this warming is not homogeneously distributed over the planet. It is extremely inhomogeneous distributed. If we now take the annual number, means all the temperature over the year, and look how it is distributed on the planet, then you already realize it's cool above in the oceans. It's cooler on the south of the equator than in the north, because what I told you, it is 2 degrees on the terrestrial surfaces, and there's much more land mass north of the equator than south. So the increase of the temperature is north. And you see that the far north you go, the warmer it gets. And the super critical thing is the north of Siberia and the very, very north of Canada, where they meet the Arctic Sea. There we have an annual warming of 6 to 8 degrees, an annual average. And this means the melting of the permafrost soils. And the melting of the permafrost soil is the sheer catastrophe, because this type of soil did not corrode yet. So if water and oxygen gets access to it, it starts corroding and it emits methane and it emits CO2 in an amount which is unbelievable. Nobody talks about it, but it is known by these researchers, not by the architects and not by the people from the agricultural department, which might make a proposal to put water on these areas, to set them just underwater so the soil cannot corrode anymore. But we ask the next question. This is the annual average. What is a monthly average, for example? Then look at this. This is June 2022. In a NASA GIS calculation we did with the program provided by the NASA, and you see now there's a super hot spot on the Mediterranean Sea, hitting Italy, hitting Spain, south of France, hitting your homeland too. And you see, if you draw the 20 to 40 band over that, where the most people, 4.6 billion out of 8 live there, then this is the hotspot band. If we don't talk about the north of Siberia where nobody is living. And now we look on the production, for example, of maize. The 6 largest maize producers in the world, interesting that France is the number 6, are drawn up here. And if we have a lifting of the global warming in the level of 2 degrees, then we have to expect a reduced yield in maize in those countries in the range of more than 100 million tons per year. Not every year, but average over the years. Only 2 degrees. We, in our institute, we expect 2.7 degrees global warming until 2050. 2.7, which is a doubling of what we have now. It is based on the continuation of the emissions, which are still going to happen. I touched that point later on. But now there is the click. There is a region where we have the biggest production of maize. The same is true for wheat and whatever. And we have a decrease in yield of 10%, easily up to 20-25% if we exceed the 2-degree global warming. Means there is 20% less grain. At the same time, until 2050, we have an increase of the world's population of 25%. The question now is there hunger? Will the people die by hunger? an increase of 25% of people and a reduction of the wheat production of 20%? One could think so. One could think so. We had this big discussion about the wheat in the harbor of Odessa, and the media told us that Somalia and everyone in Eastern Africa is going to die because of 30 million tons of wheat which cannot be transported out. So everyone blamed Putin as a murder and whatever. The question is, how much wheat and oat is out there? What is the annual production? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. We all talk about Ukrainian wheat, but nobody knows what is the world production. If you take the world production of wheat and oat and maize and every corn type thing you can eat, and you divide it by 8 billion people, and you divide it by 365 days, then you have the daily amount of what is provided for you to eat. This is your daily amount. It is 970 grams per day and person in the world. No one of my Italian colleagues can eat 970 grams of wheat per day. Imagine this is a bowl of pasta of that size. No one. There's a question of distribution and of the so-called market. And the wheat in the Ukraine, compared to those 970 grams, let's say 1 kilogram per day, is a tiny spoonful, flat spoon. It is 30 grams. So there's no reason at all that Somalia is falling into hunger. It is a question of distribution of the food we have. And this is the problem. If there is no other way for distribution, that is a revolutionary thing I'm actually saying, then millions and millions of people are going to die because of hunger, definitely. Some even say we touched 1 billion. So we have to revolutionize the way we harvest the food and we distribute the food. And of course, if countries like Germany use 80% of the harvest to feed the pigs, to make pig meat available to everyone for cheap prices, then the system does not work. So there is a lot of change to be done in our individual life in order to change the overall system and to avoid huge amount of people dying by hunger or starting, and this is now related to architecture, starting to migrate out of their areas to places where there is food available. And migration means the people leave their house and home and they walk to another place under pains and ask for a built Heimat. Heimat is a German word where there's no English word for it. It is homeland plus, 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 plus. So it's not only the geographic boundaries of your homeland, it is also the history where you have been embedded through your youth. There is the value system, the philosophical, the ethical value system. All that combined together is what we describe as Heimat. And these people ask for Heimat, of course. Our neighbors also migrated to the United States and to other countries, and our grandfathers, and asked for Heimat. The only difference is now we have hundreds of million people asking for Heimat at the same time. In former times it was a few thousand. But this is touching architecture. The fact that this decrease in crop yield takes place already again in the 20 to 40 degree area where most of the population lives indicates that there might be a heavy migration northwards. We learned that southwards in the 30 to 30 degree, there is a huge increase in the number of people. So they will migrate northwards. And in Germany are laughing because we say, okay, now we have wine growing close to Hamburg, and even in Sweden wine is growing. What does that mean? In Burgundy and in Bordeaux, wine is not growing that good anymore because the lack of water. And in Spain, they have heavy problems as well as in Italy. So if the wine production migrates northwards, the people will follow. and ask for Heimat. And then it is up to us to build something for them. We are now talking about what do we have to build? What does this mean? Heimat for one person. The building material. How much does a European person own on building material? This is the question for any architect in any oral exam. How much building material do we own as a citizen? So again, I repeat, in total we have 8 billion, the first world 1.2. The increase is interesting. This is 2.6 people net per second. We learned that in future times this will decrease from 2.6 to 2.4 to 2.5, but actually it is 2.6. 4.4 people are born per second, 1.8 unfortunately have to die. The net increase is 2.6. So if you now have to build Heimat, a house, and infrastructure for these 2.6, what does this mean per second? Now, let's see, the building material per capita. In the first world, the lower number of the boundary is 335 tons per person. Half of it is building, half of it is infrastructure, street, parking places, whatever. Hospitals, schools, university clinics, and so on. In the third world, it's only 75. If you now say, okay, but we want to reduce the drama in the third world, we want to have clean water and wastewater treatment and food and health and education for the people, what does this mean? That you need schools and that you need doctoral practices and that you need hospitals and that you need roads which guide the people to the hospitals and that you need fresh water and wastewater system to get rid of the waste. Means if you want to lift up the third world on the building level, which is also comfort, a health and an educational level of the so-called first world, then you have to build for every citizen there the difference between 335 and 75 tons, which is 260 tons per person. I call that the Nachholbedarf, the amount of material which is ethically correct to be asked for those people. We say we are living in the better world. Follow us and you will be happy. So if the people do so and follow us, in order to get happy, they need all that what we have. In Germany, even many people say Germany is a built state. There is no reason to build anymore because everyone has enough. Even in Germany, we increase the building material per capita in year in a range between 10 and 15 tons. It is the fourth lane on the Autobahn. It is a sound barrier there. It is a whatever there and a renovation there, 10 to 15 tons per capita. Now let's make an experiment of thoughts. We say, okay, the first world and the third world, they stop building. They stop building here in the year 2020. This is what the first world owns, 1.4 billion people, each one 335 tons. This is what 6.6 billion have, each one 75 tons. So the amount is more or less the same. And they say, okay, now we open a new chapter. These do not continue to build. We declare the first world to be built. Now we talk only about the difference, 6.6 billion people multiplied by 260 tons. What does it mean? It means this. If you would realize that within one generation, it would say that until 2050, you would have to add double the existing world to what is already there. Double. It is an amount of 1,700 milliarden gigatons. It is double of what already exists. And it becomes very clear to everyone, this is not possible, the material is not there. The energy is not there to produce the cement, to melt the steel, to bake the bricks. It is just impossible. And the emissions we will cause by producing that material will lift up the global warming into a level of 6 to 8 degrees, and this will be the end of all of us. But we have to face the fact. And I did not talk about the newly born, the increase per second. If we add that on the top, then we end here. And we realize this is also absolutely impossible. So we need to develop completely new technologies. We need to develop new types of shining examples. It can't be the way the West lives. This is not multiplicable to the rest of the world. But in order to be fair, we have to change the way we live and we have to change the way we build in order to somehow adjust it to what is doable. I did not talk about migration effects. They would have to be topped on the impossible. Like that. Okay. Maybe I jump over this. We can talk about energy. I state since 1995 that we do not have an energy problem. This is surprising and contradicting, but we do not have an energy problem. The sun shines more than 10,000 times more energy onto the planet than the human being needs for all their functionalities. We are bathing and swimming in energy. Plus, to the sun energy, the radiation energy, we have the wind and we have the geothermal and we have the waves and whatever, hydro energy. There is plenty of energy. We have no energy problem. The energy problem we have is a management problem since after the World War II. We are providing our energy by fossil materials, by combusting oil and gas and coal and wood, and they emit greenhouse gases, which cause the problem. So we should call it that way. As soon as we get rid of the fossil-based energy, there is no energy problem. There is no need for heavy thermal insulations, and all architects will be happy. We can do these slender cantilevers again, and we can do whatever slim things again, and we do not have toxic waste on the side with all that styrofoam and gypsum and glue and so on. We just don't need it. Something has been forgotten by the governments and not really accelerated by the industry, and this is the replacement of the fossil-based energy by wind and, for example, solar photovoltaics, for example. Now in Germany, the politicians are so keen that they lie to China and tell the Chinese that they are completely on the wrong way publicly, which for a Chinese man is like hitting him with a hand into the face. And forgetting about the fact that China is producing 97% of all the photovoltaic cells in the world. So there is no change in the energy system in Germany if the Chinese people say, or the Chinese government says, there is no PV for Germany anymore. This is the problem we actually have. So we are getting rid of the fossil-based energy, which solves to 95% the emission and the greenhouse problem, but we do not have the replacement because we are not ready yet for that. We don't have the high voltage lines, the overland lines, and we do not have the producing units, and we do not have the storage units. So the birthday party did not even begin. So we still have to put styrofoam on our cantilevering walls, unfortunately. But we have to accelerate that effect. But this is all what has to be said on energy. There is no energy problem. There's the problem on how to provide non-fossil energy to the people. That's all. But there is the emission problem, the global warming. And the question is, why does the Paris Protocol, the Paris Treaty, say 1.5 degree? And why is every politician on Sunday morning speeches talking about 1.5? We try to keep 1.5. I'm positive that we keep 1.5, if not dramatically below 2. The Paris Treaty is not very clear. Sometimes it says below 2 or 1.5. Whatever, whether it is 1.5 or 1.7. Why is the number there? Why it is not 3.7, 3.8, 4.1? This has nothing to do with melting the glaciers, nothing to do with the fact that the Maldives go underwater. The sentence in the Paris Treaty, which is the reason for the 1.5, has to ensure food security. This is the point. To prevent the majority of the world's population from hunger. Because as you learn, the increased temperature in the critical region where we have the critical production will drop the crop yield, and this will provide hunger to hundreds of millions of people and death. This is the issue. It stands in the Paris Protocol since 8 years. Nobody knows it. Now the question, 1.5, can we keep it? Can we not keep it? We keep 1.5. We are going to zero emission in 2050, the other one in 2030, the very competitive one in 2025, or whatever. You can put any number there. It does not make any sense. The only sense-making issue is the fact that there's a working point. We have a concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is 420 parts per million molecules, 420. In the pre-industrial time, it was 280. The difference caused the warming. If you add another 10 from 420 to 430, you have an increase in temperature. And the context is somehow linear, which allows you a prediction on how much can we emit until we reach 1.5. Can we emit it in 1 day or 100 years? What is it? It is 290 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. 290 gigatons, which is 290, now be careful, in the American-speaking billions, no, trillions, in the rest of the world speaking milliarden, which is a big difference, yeah? The factor is 1,000. There's a system international, all the governments of the world signed, which means we talk about Millionen, Milliarden and metric tons, except the US and Nigeria. They still keep to other measure units, which causes all those conflicts. So I'm talking about 10 exponent 9 gigatons of CO2 can be emitted. This is an unbelievable big number. And everyone says, great, I buy a new car with a combustion engine. Because people don't know that the human beings emit 1,300 tons per second. And if you divide the 290 gigatons by 1,300 per second, the result is 7 years. Means if we continue to emit as we do, the 290 gigatons are eaten up in 7 years, and the 1.5 degree target of the Paris Treaty is broken. And this is the fact. So the blue line here, this is the emission as we experience them up to now. This is COVID, Corona, the tiny dip. And from there on, you can draw any curve you want, with any final date you want to announce. The only scientific thing you have to fulfill is that the integral, the area below the curve, is 290. So for example, like this. This is 290. If we continue to emit as we do, we hit the goal in the year 2030. And then the story with the crop yield reduction, the hunger, and the mass-wise migration starts latest then. Now the question is, which is the path we are on? the path is an increase. So there is no understanding by the human society what needs to be done. And the building industry contributes 50% of that. This is of importance. 50% is us. So even if we say, okay, we have a sharp decline like this, as rapid as unimaginable, the surface of the triangle is the same surface of the rectangle, and then we added 2038. This is the objective we have to fulfill. Means we have to turn whatever we build, emission-wise, from the head to the legs, or upside down, or whatever. Otherwise, it does not work. Now, a few examples. I think we have a few minutes left on what we did in the last years in order to contribute, in order to find out what are the effects. Are these effects really important? Is this objective doable, or is it just a naive wish? What are we talking about? We designed a couple of buildings. Typically, a residential house is not because I put residential house in a favor. I did it in small examples because this is the only risk I could pay. If I do a 100 million building which does not work, I'm ruined. If I do a residential building and have my secret talk to the owner and say, if the heating does not really work, I replace it on my cost, then my risk is 10 or 20,000. So the house I'm living in since 22 years, I took a higher risk, of course. The house violates 60 German codes, 60. If I would have gone through a normal building procedure at the administration, this house would not be there. So I had to find my way. Even works in Germany. The most important thing is, don't look at the house itself. The most important thing is on the technical aspect, less material. The house needs 15% of the material of a conventional house in the same size. 15%. The house does not use any fossil-based energy. The house is 90%, 95% recyclable, and it has no chimney. There is no exhaust. It's an emission-free building. 22 years ago, when I moved in, I said, okay, this is absolutely great, emission-free, no chimney. I did not realize that the production of the material and the transportation of the material is also causing emissions. I did not look that far at those times. In the meantime, we know that these effects are dramatically high. And in our office, whenever we draw up something, we fully automatically count the weight and we count the emission, and we include the transport emissions too. And this then is the end which we have to minimize. But as I always say, living in Heimat has to make fun too. So I will never move out. The only reason to get me out is being a dead man. And the house is a one-room house, 4 stories high, so that you can talk in the lowest floor with the one sitting in the uppermost floor. The 40 tons the house weight is 20 tons of glass and 10 tons of steel. It's very simple. Everything is very simple. But if you see me on my desk working, this is a photograph I'm taken in the front door into the house. You are living in the green. You do not need any paintings. You do not need any flowers on the table because you are just embedded in nature. And this is the interesting thing. Since 22 years, I don't have a wristwatch because I learned like an animal in the forest to know what time it is, depending on the intensity and the color of the outside light. And you sleep with the birds and the insects, of course, which might be a little bit uncomfortable too, but you are an integral part of nature. And this is what I want to achieve with my way to do architecture. Put the people into the nature, make them feeling the nature, and get them a feeling that nature is the most important thing we have. If we destroy nature, then we can give up. Architecture does not count then anymore. So we have to change the objectives. In order to maximize our monetary income, we have to maximize the profit for the nature of all our doings. But this is a revolution. Next pavilion. I said, okay, now this house has no chimney, boring. Yeah? We build a house which produces double the energy it needs. And for the first time in history, this house talks digitally to a neighbored house designed by Le Corbusier in 1927, which is an energy sink, of course. But instead of putting styrofoam inside this national monument designed by Le Corbusier, I said, let the lady, as beautiful as she is, in her age, just feed her up with solar energy. Replace oil by solar in a huge amount, why not? And we contribute with the house here. 50% of the energy harvest goes to the Le Corbusier house. It's not sufficient, but it is the principle, as I call it, the principle of sisterhood. The strong one helps the weak one. And this is a new vision of our society. Not every individual has to fulfill a requirement. No. An entity has to fulfill a requirement. An entity has to be energy-wise independent from public nets. This is important. But besides the fact that this is energy-wise a super building and the first one ever, you can drive with the car into the house. Since it is, of course, an electric-driven car, there is no exhaust pipe in the car. So you drive into the house, and even if it rains, you get grandma out and the six-packs out and whatever in. You need only one stereo because it's in the car, and if you're not at home, you don't need a stereo. The big thing is many people said, but I fear there's so much glass. The glass is expensive because it's vacuum glass, the first time ever, floor-to-floor vacuum glass. A gift from my friend, Professor Wang in Shanghai, who owns the 3 most important patents on vacuum glass. So this was industrial development aid from east to west, not from west to east. It is a product which is not available in the West, but in China. So this is the big windows there. People said, I cannot drive with the car, this is too delicate. So we integrated a turntable into the living room. So you drive in forwards, you push a button on your cell phone, the car automatically rotates by 180 degrees, and then you leave forward again. So everyone has fun. Yeah, the kids are permanently rotating. They have their fun. People have fun. Great. People love their house. And technologically wise, it was mostly prefabricated. This is the electric car, and once you are going to holidays or sleeping at night, you might even flip up the balcony or the terrace, and then the house has no visible window. And there's a heavy package of insulation wrapped around the house, so you do not need any energy. You are living like in a cheese box. And in the morning hours, you flip the terrace down, open the window, and then it's day. And then we prolonged that, we industrialized that to modular buildings with many, many different types of facade in a high-speed way of buildings in a super high quality, even for refugee homes. The only thing where you realize that it's a refugee home is that the fridge is from the cheaper sort, yeah? The non-refugee, they have then whatever, a millet, and for the refugees, the state or the government limits the quality and the cost, so we have a very cheap one from an Eastern country. And then, when everything became boring for us because we were capable to do so, I had been asked by a Swiss research unit to cooperate with them for the largest research in buildings ever done in Switzerland, which is a 100 million Swiss franc invest, and is something which takes place on 3 platforms, in total 12 units. I'm the only non-Swiss who was invited to contribute, and we contributed this, which is a building mostly made of secondary material. It's building with waste. 2 doctoral students are living there. They live there for free, therefore they have to admit visitor groups 2 times a week. It is a perfect way of living. The exterior, what you see here, this is copper, which we took from a bank building which was demolished and from a church which was demolished. So we took the copper and we sorted it out and made this patterning here, which remembers very much to Eastern Africa. And inside it is nothing else than an assembly of recycled aluminum. This is recycled bricks, this is recycled glass, this is recycled concrete, recycled glass, everything is recycled, except the load-bearing structure, this is wood. This is the assembly of recycled materials we have been using. Even fungus stabilized materials. This was old wood, which we shredded down to tiny particles. Then we place mycelium into it, and we feed it the mycelium, and it grew through the wooden particles. And once there was no air anymore, we stopped feeding it. We heated it up to 60 degrees, and it became hard. And then we sliced it, and we used it as insulation material. So it's 100% bio, and really healthy bio. You can eat that if you want. You can eat up the entire house. So this is formerly jeans, which we used as this is Tetra Pak. This is glass, remelted, but not to 1,400 degrees, only to 600. So it's like honey, but it is enough to make it watertight and to make it airtight. It's not transparent, but we save more than half of the energy in forming the new product and generation compared to the first line. This, in the meantime, became famous. This is Dübendorf marble. Dübendorf is the city where the experimental building stands, and it's called by the people as marble. In fact, it is PET bottles, transparent ones with dark blue caps, which have been shredded, melted to 60 degrees, put in a big bath, cooled down, and then sliced. And this is the interior of the bathrooms, toilets, etc. It's watertight, it's super hygienic, and it's secondary material. And this indicates the chances aesthetically you have, not only sustainability-wise, when you build with complete new materials, never seen before. The only thing being an architect is you have to fire that through. Because in Germany would say this is not an accepted material. It is not in the books. This is something nobody knows. Who is guaranteeing for that? And you have to tell your client, I guarantee for it. Or let's make 50-50. You have the sensation, and in case it does not work, we share the problem. And then we multiplied this into industrially prefabricated units for a big hospital. And this is not container building. This is not Plattenbauweise. This has an architectural quality which is absolutely super. I would even say that if I would not be the architect, the people love it. It does more or less need no energy. It is a plus energy building, by the way. It has no chimney, of course. It is highly decomposable and recyclable. It exactly fulfills what we are permanently talking about. So ending with this, we might sum up that now knowing a little bit more about the problems we are standing in and which we are facing. And since we are living in one world, we cannot make a difference between Germany and Serbia or Europe and the rest. It is one world. 1 ton of greenhouse gases, which is emitted today in China, is 3 days later here. So there is no fence, there is no borderline. Either we make it with one world and one population and one will, or we can give it up. But the headline or the technical aspect should be, we have to build for more people with less material and emission-free. And of course, it must make fun for the people, otherwise they don't stay healthy in the buildings we are responsible for. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Šta reći posle ovakvih reči, ali ajde da pričamo malo o nagradama, priznanju i pohvalama. Izvinjavam se, moram naočare, ništa ne vidim. Mićo? Tu? Ne, tu. Vaši. Evo, večera sada nastavljamo ovo naše druženje dodelom pohvala, nagrada i priznanja 45. Salona arhitekture po odluci Žirija u pomenutom sastavu. Mislim da nema potrebe da ponavljamo nekoliko puta. Svima je već jasno ko su bili članovi i predsednik Žirija. Krećemo od prve kategorije arhitekture i od pohvale u kategoriji arhitekture dobio je rad Kuće sa pogledom na Dunav u Grockoj arhitektkinje Milene Zindović, te pozivam autorku da nam se pridruži i primi pohvalu. Veliko, dve Dragana da fotografiše. Imamo još jednu pohvalu u kategoriji arhitekture i to pohvalu za projekat neizvedenog dela. Ovu pohvalu dobio je rad Sveštica House, Mada Architecture studija i tima Aleksandar Istović, Nikola Andonov, Stefan Stojanović i pozivam Nikolu Andonova, suosnivača, da primi pohvalu. Posle ove dve pohvale ostajemo u kategoriji arhitekture u okviru koje se žiri odlučio da nagradi rad, odnosno projekat Manhattan Koncept K26 autorskog tima dr. Grozdana Šišović, Dejan Milanović, Nikola Milanović. Pozivam Grozdanu Šišović da primi nagradu i kratko se obrati ispred ured studija Reakt. Kratko. Možete i ovde, po volji. Može.
Hvala, pa evo, rekla bih samo, uprko svemu, još uvek verujem u arhitekturu, u moć arhitekture da u kontekstu predstavlja makar mali kritički gest, makar jednu malu iskru lepote. Verujem u znanje, u napređenje znanja i u saradnju. Prethodni put kad smo Dejan i ja primili nagradu na Salonu arhitekture, Nikola Milanović, koji je sada član našeg autorskog tima, bio je u zvanju studenta, saradnika, a sada evo zajedno potpisujemo jedan projekat, takođe uz ogroman doprinos izvođača Gradmila i investitora RS Gradnje, bez kojih ovaj objekat ne bi bio ovakav. Hvala svima.
Sad opet nastavljam, ali u drugoj kategoriji. U kategoriji arhitektonska fotografija, u kojoj je pohvalu dobio rad Dobrović u ateljeu, autora Miloša Kostića, koga pozivam da primi pohvalu. Aha, u detalju. Izvinjavam se. Evo da se, oprostite, u detalju, nije u ateljeu. U kategoriji arhitektonska fotografija nagradu je dobio rad Arhitektura između Dođeš mi, dođem ti, autorke Milice Lopičić. I pošto ona večeras nije ovde, Pozivam Vojislavu Lopičić da primi nagradu i obrati se u Milicino ime. Eto, u njeno ime.
Hvala. Pa evo, u Miličino ime zahvaljujem se Salonu i žiriju Salona što je prepoznao kvalitet fotografije, arhitektonske fotografije koja ne prikazuje arhitekturu kako je uobičajeno na reprezentativan način, već prikazuje jedan generičan prostor, pojednostavljen prostor u okviru koga se dešavaju transakcije umetničkih, visoko estetizovanih umetničkih dela, jedno zatvoreno tržište kojim se Milica inače u svom umetničkom radu u poslednje vreme bavi. Imala je i izložbu New Deal skoro u Beogradu i ako vas interesuje o tome da pogledate, možete na njenom sajtu lopičić.de. Hvala vam.
Sad idemo u kategoriju arhitektonska kritika i publikacija, u okviru koje je pohvalu dobio atlas tipova karaktera predela Beograda autorskog tima Nevena Vasiljević, Boris Radić, Anja Matić, Emilija Medojević, Suzana Gavrilović i Andreja Tutundžić. Pozivam Nevenu Vasiljević, vanrednu profesorku i rukovodioca projekta, da primi pohvalu. Nagradu u kategoriji arhitektonska kritika i publikacija dobio je rad Nikola Dobrović, The Shifting Modes of Critical Practice in Architecture, autorke Marije Milinković, i pozivam Mariju da primi nagradu i kratko se obrati. Inače, Marija je otkazala put da bi došla večeras ovde.
Hvala žiriju, hvala muzeju, hvala asocijaciji. Pre svega zato što ste ove godine postavili jednu ovako važnu temu, tema dijalog, salon dijaloga. Htela bih da se zahvalim takođe svim kolegama, prijateljima, institucijama koji su učestvovale u nastanku ove knjige. Naime, monografija jeste posvećena jednom arhitekti, jednom izuzetnom arhitekti. Ja sam potpisana kao autor, ali ništa manje od arhitekture. Knjige takođe nastaju kao rezultat intenzivne komunikacije, dijaloga, razgovora i ova knjiga je takođe nastala kao rezultat jednog dugog putovanja. Na tom putovanju je bilo mnogo, dobila sam veliku podršku od pre svega od izdavača Hansa Ibelingsa, zatim od moje matične kuće Arhitektonskog fakulteta u Beogradu, i zahvaljujem se njima i svim kolegama, prijateljima koji su doprineli da ja danas budem sa vama ovde. Hvala svima.
U kategoriji istraživanja i eksperimenta imamo dve pohvale. Pozivam Dušanu Nikolić ispred La Villette studija arhitekture za decu da primi pohvalu, prvu pohvalu. Drugu pohvalu u ovoj kategoriji za istraživanje i eksperiment dobio je rad Ko je uopšte arhitekta, autorke Sare Parezanović i saradnica i saradnika Anđela Ivanović, Rastko Šundić, Đorđe Đurica, Sara Dragović. Pozivam Saru Parezanović, suosnivača i glavnog predavača Arhitektonskog centra Kiparh, da primi pohvalu. U istoj ovoj kategoriji imamo i dve nagrade. Nagradu za rad Eco Figure, This Waste is not a toy, dobio je autor Andrej Josifovski, pijanista, i pozivam ga da primi nagradu i kratko se obrati.
Prizma je malo drugačija. Dobro veče. Kakav dan i kakva godina. Ja bih na samom početku želeo da kažem da ne mogu da budem sad lažno skroman, da nisam očekivao ovo, ali pre svega želim da se zahvalim svima onima koji veruju u to što radim i celom timu ljudi koji je tu stalno iza mene i koji me podržava i bez kojih se ove stvari ne bi bile moguće. Hteo sam da poentiram na nečem drugom, odnosno da se pre svega zahvalim žiriju, hrabrom žiriju, savetu, muzeju, asocijaciji, svima onima koji su, slobodno ću reći, imali hrabrosti da mi dodele ovu nagradu, s obzirom da verovatno je velikoj većini jasno da upirem prstom u probleme, ali da se ne bavim politikom. Ako bi neko rekao da je to politika, onda bih ja rekao da je žiri dobro prepoznao da umetnost sme da se meša u politiku, ali politika nikako ne bi smela umetnost. S obzirom da mi živimo u jednoj sredini koja je zatrpana otpadom koji je oko nas i taj otpad je svake vrste, drago mi je da je rad koji se bavi otkrivanjem divljih deponija i njihovim mapiranjem dobio ovu nagradu i jako sam srećan zapravo što drugi put stojim na ovom mestu sa ovom prizmom. Jako me to čini srećnim, evo i moj sin vam se isto javlja. I za kraj sam da se zahvalim onima koji su radili na ovom projektu, pre svega Jovanu Memedoviću, gospodinu koji je posvetio svoj, rećemo, životni vek prirodi, njegovoj produkciji Sasvim prirodno, Eko Star Paku, koji su zajedno sa mnom, kako se to kaže, stručno koproducentski radili i realizovali smo ovaj projekat uz mnogo ljudi koji su svesrdno stalno tu uz mene, recimo produkcija Soul Time Media, eminentni fotograf Nebojša Babić, moji kumovi inženjeri, doktor Miodrag Grbić koji je radio, evo ga ovde, prošli put smo zajedno dobili nagradu, koji je radio statiku konstrukcije, Ognjen Graovac, kolega arhitekta koji je radio parametarski, ovo nismo planirali, parametarski proračun, Ivan Mitić koji je radio kao mašinski inženjer i naravno Željko Bravar, koga moram da pomenem, koji realizuje sve ono što ja zamislim. Tako da to je jedna ekipa odabrana i uigrana i već radimo na mnogo nekih drugih stvari koje se nadam da će vam se dopasti. I samo za kraj voleo bih da kažem da maštam da jednog dana postoji jedan ovakav žiri koji će ovako neku bitnu temu prepoznati i da, s obzirom da često stojim i zamišljam zlatno glava, da će ovako nešto ugledati svetlo i u Veneciji. A ono što je posebno važno, rekao sam da je dan ovaj bio dug, hoću da vam kažem da u ovom gradu danas ima jedna nova osoba, a shodno zakonima koji vladaju u ovoj zemlji, pola ove nagrade pripada njoj, to je moja supruga Anja Josifovski od danas. Hvala. Molim vas jedan aplauz za nju. Da. Hvala vam puno još jednom svima, zaista mi je velika čast što stojim ovde ponovo sa nagradom. Hvala vam. Sine, ajde, uzeli smo nagradu, idemo kući da radimo. Aleksi, vratit ćemo se, obećavam, ajde. Izvinjavamo se.
Ništa, kakvi. Pa ovo su ne duple, nego izgleda triple čestitka danas, svaka čast. Možemo da nastavimo. Druga nagrada u pomenutoj kategoriji je za rad Crvena linija autora Branka Stanojevića i pozivam autora da primi nagradu za ovaj rad i kratko se obrati.
Hvala. Dobro večer. Hvala Žiriju, hvala muzeju. Ovaj rad mi je jako bitan i ja bih se pre svega zahvalio mom pradedi, mom dedi, ocu, znači srpskim seljacima što su mi sačuvali ovu njivu kao ličnu platformu za istraživanje i eksperiment. U stogodišnjoj istoriji ove njive se prelama društveni kontekst i istorija Srbije. Ona je bila oduzeta od komunizma, pa je vraćena, a sada je bila put za budući rudnik Rio Tinto. Nije Rio Tinto tema ovog rada, to je jedan sloj. I to je za mene bio istraživački poligon da preispitam unutrašnju, ličnu i moralnu liniju odnosa prema tome. Oni su se bavili poljoprivredom, a ja moram odbranom koja prelazi u land art, landscape, koja pokreće pitanje linije crvene u društvu, a najbitnije u ličnim našim osjećajima, moralnim vertikalama i gde je ta naša linija, da li je ona početak konflikta ili možda početak dijaloga. Hvala.
U kategoriji urbanizam nagrada nije dodeljena, a pohvalu je dobio rad Plato sa fontanom u Velikom parku u Šapcu, autorke Milene Zindović, te još jednom, Milena, pozivam te da primiš pohvalu.
Hvala, evo ja sam dobila čast, pošto sam dobila 2 pohvale, da ipak kažem 2 reči. Pa ću samo da kažem da mi je drago da je dodeljena makar i pohvala u kategoriji urbanizam, za koju inače smatram da treba da promeni ime u javni prostori i da se nadam da će ova kategorija u budućnosti imati više radova. Hvala.
Inače, ja ću samo kratko da napomenem da je Milena bila prošlogodišnja članica saveta 44. salona koji smo realizovali sa Ženskim arhitektonskim društvom. U kategoriji unutrašnja arhitektura, inače do sada je zvana enterijer, žiri je odlučio da dodali pohvalu za 2 rada. Prva pohvala je za projekat enterijera Polet grupe Antipod studija i pozivam Branka Nikolića, jednog od osnivača i direktora studija, da primi pohvalu. Sledi pohvala za projekat Autori Office studija Autori i pozivam Maju Necić da primi pohvalu. U kategoriji unutrašnja arhitektura nagradu je dobio rad, odnosno projekat unutrašnje arhitekture Muzeja savremene umetnosti Republike Srpske u Banja Luci, studija Lopičić i Lopičić arhitekte, Pavla Stamenkovića i saradnika Miloša Jokića. Večeras pozivam Pavla, jel tako, pošto mi je prvo bilo rečeno da će Vojislava ili Pavle, svejedno, da kaže koju reč, da primi nagradu i da kaže koju reč. Može i zajedno. Evo može ovako, a onda... Hvala. Možete i onda ovako.
Hvala Salonu, hvala Žiriju prvenstveno. Hvala celom timu koji je učestvovao na ovom projektu. Arhitektima koje je Biljana već pomenula, kompaniji Koto koji su na izuzetan način uradili izvođenje radova na projektu. Projekat je u fazama, sveobuhvatan, veliki i dalje traje. I voleo bih da se zahvalim direktorki muzeja, Sari Vujković, koja je večeras sa nama, došla iz Banja Luke, na jednoj važnoj stvari, na njenoj inicijativi, na njenoj posvećenosti rekonstrukciji takve institucije kakva je Muzej savremene umetnosti u Banja Luci, ali i poverenju koje je nekako svima dala u ovom procesu kako bismo zajedničkim snagama od kompleksnog objekta stare željezničke stanice napravili ili radili na tome da se taj prostor osavremeni na najbolji mogući način. Voki, hoćeš da rešeš nešto ti?
Mogu da se zahvalim sjajnom Pavlu koji se na sjajan, fantastičan način pridružio našem timu. Saradnja sa njim kao i uvek bila je sjajna i naravno želim da se zahvalim i žiriju Salona što je prepoznao kvalitet našeg rada i odlučio da nam dodeli nagradu. I verujem da će ova nagrada doprineti da ovaj sjajan tim, uključujući direktorku muzeja i naše izvođače, nastavi dalje da radi, jer i sam prostor muzeja ima fantastičnih predispozicija dalje da se razvija i programski i prostorno. Hvala vam na pažnji. Hvala.
Ja ću isto da iskoristim jednu malu priliku da pozdravim moju dragu koleginicu Saru Vujković, a posebno imajući u vidu da se nagrada dodeljuje u polju muzeja, što je stvarno jedna od velikih stavki. Prelazimo na sledeću kategoriju, to je zaštita graditeljskog nasleđa i u ovoj kategoriji pohvalu je dobio projekat rekonstrukcija objekta muzeja na arheološkom nalazištu Medijana u Nišu, autorskog tima profesor Ivan Rašković, profesor Borisav Petrović, docent Miloš Komlenić i arhitekta Nada Jelić. Pozivam Miloša Komlenića, docenta Arhitektonskog fakulteta, da primi pohvalu. Nagradu u kategoriji zaštita graditeljskog nasleđa dobio je projekat Vila Porta Maestra, rekonstrukcija i prenamena autorskog tima Ema Stojković-Jerinić, Nemanja Kordić, Nikola Stevanović. Pozivam Nemanju Kordića, partnera studija Mart, Arhitekture, da primi nagradu i kratko se obrati.
Hvala. Hvala svima, hvala žiriju i Salonu. Pre svega mojim partnerima Nikoli i Emi sa kojima je ovaj projekat realizovan od početka. Ovo je jedan od naših prvih projekata, star već 5 godina. I evo od te 2018. od 23. 5 godina dugog procesa i dijaloga sa različitim stakeholderima, Zavodom za zaštitu iz Hvara, zatim lokalnim partnerom koji nam je jako puno pomogao, arhitektom Ivom Vojnovićem, izvođačima, Spegrom, Šimetom Šurjakom koji je vodio radove za sve ovo vreme i brinuo o objektu. I naravno hvala klijentu Urošu Sarjanoviću koji je imao sluha i koji je zapravo bio jedan od medijatora sveukupnog dijaloga. Zaista je bio potreban da se graditeljsko nasleđe i rimske iskopine i nalazi i arheološki nalazi otkriveni na samom lokalitetu integrišu u arhitekturu i u taj novi program vile koja sada treba dočeka svoje goste. Hvala puno.
Inače, u kategoriji virtualna arhitektura nismo imali ni pohvale ni nagrade, iako jesmo imali panel na tu temu i trebalo bi imati što više razgovora na tu temu da bi bilo i radova među kojima može da se izabere. Tako da sa kategorijama i nagradama i pohvalama završavamo do Grand Prix-a naravno, a u međuvremenu pozvaću Milku Gnjato. Iako se prethodnih godina dodeljivalo i priznanje po kategorijama, Savet 45. Salona arhitekture odlučio je da se priseti ranije prakse i priznanje dodeli jednom projektu, i to projektu van takmičarskih kategorija. Priznanje Saveta 45. Salona arhitekture, dakle jedino priznanje, za izuzetno angažovanje i doprinos u pripremi, koncipiranju i prezentaciji krovnog strateškog dokumenta za razvoj i unapređenje arhitektonske struke u zemlji dobila je Nacionalna arhitektonska strategija autora Božane Lukić i Nebojše Anteševića. Pozivam Milku Gnjato da dodeli nagradu, a i Božanu Lukić, šeficu odseka za arhitektonsku politiku i građevinske proizvode, da primi priznanje i obrati se publici.
Hvala vam. Pa, ja sam znala da ću biti naročito uzbuđena, pa sam zato par reči napisala. Neće dugo trajati. Dakle, pre svega želim da se zahvalim u svoje ime i u ime kolege Nebojše Anteševića, koji je tu večera sa nama, a potom i u ime institucije iz koje dolazimo, a koja je pokrenula izradu i nosilac je izrade i donošenja nacionalne arhitektonske strategije, odnosno Ministarstva građevinarstva, saobraćaja i infrastrukture, na ovom značajnom priznanju. Iako strategija, tako reći, još uvek nije doneta, javna rasprava je okončana pre nekih mesec dana, ovo priznanje pokazuje da je njen značaj već prepoznat u profesionalnoj zajednici i stručnoj javnosti i prepoznat kao krovnog dokumenta, znači krovnog dokumenta koji će doprineti unapređenju arhitektonske profesije i prakse i njene uloge u društvu, njihove uloge u društvu, podizanju jačanja značaja kvaliteta arhitekture i građene sredine za prostorni i kulturni identitet Republike Srbije, ali pre svega čini se jačanju međusobne komunikacije i poverenja u institucije. Želela bih da napomenem da su se u izradi strategije, pre svega kroz učešće u radu radne grupe za izradu strategije, da su učestvovali predstavnici relevantnih institucija, ministarstava, pre svega Ministarstva kulture, zatim Republičkog zavoda za zaštitu spomenika kulture, zatim arhitektonski fakulteti, strukovna udruženja iz Novog Sada, Beograda, Niša, stalna konferencija gradova, opština i drugi. Ovom prilikom se svima njima zahvaljujem za učešće i doprinos. I za kraj, samo još da kažem da, iako smo Nebojša i ja predstavnici javne uprave, za nas je ovo veliko profesionalno iskustvo, priznanje, a svakako i iskustvo, koje nam govori da smo prepoznati kao dostojni predstavnici naše arhitektonske profesije u javnoj upravi i na tome se zahvaljujemo, pre svega Savetu Salona arhitekture koji nam je ovo priznanje dodelio. Hvala vam.
Među brojnim nivoima dijaloga, jedan od malo skrajnutih, možda i prethodnih brojnih vremena, je bio dijalog sa javnošću. S tim u vezi, Savet 45. Salona arhitekture doneo je odluku da uvede novu nagradu, to je nagrada publike. Za nagradu publike glasali su svi koji su došli na izložbu, obišli izložbu, mogli i nisu morali da kupe kartu, upisali svoj broj, odnosno, da tako kažem, šifru rada i prebrojavljanje glasova Najviše glasova 45. salona arhitekture publika je dala projektu Kuća na brdu Popare, opština Valjevo. Pozivam Jelenu Marković da primi nagradu u ime projektnog biroa KEJ.
Hvala vam. Dobroveče svima. Zahvalila bi se na ovoj nagradi u ime našeg tima. Ovaj projekat predstavlja jednu sinergiju svih učesnika, zato bih posebno istakla važnost saradnje projektantskog i izvođačkog tima naše firme, ali i podršku od strane investitora i ovo priznanje nam je podstrek za dalje i hvala još jednom. Veliko.
Dobro. Eto, potrefilo se da se 2 godine za redom žiri odlučio da veliku nagradu ili Grand Prix zavređuje ne jedan, već 2 rada podjednako. Grand Prix 45. salona arhitekture dobili su, evo prvo da pozovem, projekat Tvrđava Fetilsalm, rekonstrukcija Varoš kapije, bedema sa kazamatima, letnja pozornica malog grada i firma Koto. Pozivam Slobodana Radovanovića, izvršnog direktora konzervatorsko-restauratorskog sektora firme Koto, da primi veliku nagradu i obrati se publici. Velike čestitke za veliku nagradu. Izvolite.
Ja ću isto pročitati. Znači, na početku želim da se zahvalim u ime svih kolega iz kompanije Koto i u svoje lično ime Muzeju primenjene umetnosti u Beogradu i Asocijaciji srpskih arhitektonskih praksi na uspešnoj organizaciji 45. salona arhitekture u Salonu dijaloga. Zahvaljujem se žiriju Salona na nagradi u kategoriji, mislio sam, zaštite graditeljskog nasljeđa, sada i za ovaj Grand Prix. U pitanju je rekonstrukcija Varoš kapije, bedema, kazamata, letnje pozornice malog grada, tvrđave Fetislam u Kladovu, kao što ste rekli. Na obnovi tvrđave Fetislam radili su brojni stručnjaci od arhitekata, arheologa, inženjera, raznih drugih struka, konzervatora, restauratora, do kvalifikovanih majstora za ovu vrstu radova. Za nas koji se bavimo zaštitom nasljeđem, bitno je napomenuti da je u toku izvođenja radova urađena obimna arhitektonska i arheološka dokumentacija, da je napisana naučno-popularna monografija o istraživanjima i radovima na tvrđavi Fetislam. I ovom prilikom želim posebno da se zahvalim celom timu kompanije Koto koji je učestvovao u izvođenju radova, a posebno 2 koleginicama, magistru Gordani Simić, diplomiranom inženjeru arhitekture, savjetniku Republičkog zavoda za zaštitu spomenika kulture u penziji i koleginici Anici Radosavljević, master inženjeru arhitekture. Velika zahvalnost svima vama u ime celog tima kompanije Koto na prilici da prezentujemo poslove na kojima radimo. Ovakvi događaji, smotre, nagrade veoma su motivišuće i koristim ovu priliku da najavim nove zanimljive projekte u oblasti zaštite graditeljskog nasljeđa, kako iz naše zemlje, tako i iz regiona. Hvala veliko još jednom.
Drugu veliku nagradu 45. salona arhitekture dobio je projekat Stringeri, evolucija prekarnosti, sloboda svedočenja, nastao u saradnji efemera kolektiva i Centra za istraživanje i edukaciju o holokaustu. Pozivam Miljanu Zeković da primi veliku nagradu i obrati se publici.
Dobroveče. Za svaki slučaj, vrlo kratko ću, obećavam. Hvala Muzeju primenjene umetnosti, hvala žiriju i savetu 45. salona arhitekture Danas je sjajan dan za nas, samim tim što je naš projekat prepoznat kao nosilac velike ideje, realizovan u dijalogu između Centra za istraživanje edukacije o holokaustu i arhitektonskog kolektiva Efemera. Ovo i nije bio konvencionalni projekat, već jedna neprestana reverzibilna razmena od svog starta do kraja. Dijalog u kojem su obe strane naučile da slušaju i da čuju u pokušaju da jednoj velikoj priči o stringerima dozvole prostorenje. Zahvaljujem se Nikoli Radiću Lutatiju iz centra na prilici i ovom našem uspostavljenom dijalogu i razumevanju iz kojih je nastala jedna, rekla bih, neraskidiva veza. Hvala.
Meni je posebno drago zato što je Miljana članica Saveta i za učešće Republike Srbije na Bijenalu arhitekture ove godine koji zajedno radimo. Ja evo samo ću kratko da čestitam svim dobitnicima, onima koji nisu dobili nagradu, ali koji jesu učestvovali ili ni nagradu, ni pohvalu, ni priznanja, ali jesu učestvovali u revijalnoj izložbi koja može da se pogleda u Muzeju primenjene umetnosti do 29. aprila, koja je stvarno jedan sastavni deo svih ovih priča koje smo večeras spomenuli, o kojima smo razgovarali tokom dosadašnjih predavanja i panela. Pozivam sve one koji jesu primili pohvalu, nagradu i priznanje da dođu da se zajedno fotografišemo, članove Saveta i profesora Sobeka, a sve ostale pozivam da se malo družimo, onako neformalno, i uz koktel sa desne strane, u sali sa desne strane. Hvala još jednom svima na svemu.